Welcome to
Ripkeys Family Fun Night.
Hey everybody, I'm Chase Will.
I'm Lucas Liner.
I'm Robin Luddite.
And I'm Ashley McDonald.
And welcome to Cryptese Family Fun Night. Tonight, we want to play a game. We're going to go through every Saw movie in the franchise, love them or hate them. We're going to talk about the highs, the lows, what we wanted to see and what wasn't there, and what could have been recast. Join us as we go film by film in the most beloved or hated franchise of the last 20 years. Starting with opening thoughts. Does anybody have opening thoughts on the franchise in general?
Gruesome.
Gruesome.
It's hard to watch, yes.
Ashton, you're like the biggest Saw fan I've ever met in my life. You must have some thoughts.
I do. I would like to say things like torture porn as well as some psychology. I would say it wrapped up like a series that wrapped up from beginning to end, even though it switched kind of direction along the way. I would say that was pretty impressive for a series to do that. So many thoughts. Can't wait to get started.
Lucas, so from the marketing standpoint too, I read a cool study recently. Is a book a professor from Bowling Green State University did. He was saying that the Saw kind of gave birth to the whole director's cut thing, like you said, as a new way of marketing the films. And they would add like maybe a minute or so into the movies, and they became collector's items. Like people would buy both versions just as a completionist thing. And then after that, you had like Turistas, you had Hostel, you had every other movie had an uncut version that was released shortly after the theatrical version. So it was kind of a way of like pushing the DVD medium forward. So it was still physical media. People would go out of their way to find these, just knowing there's going to be like 30, 40 seconds more. One more thing I want to touch on too before we start is there's a central theme I saw throughout all the movies. I want to see what you guys think of this. Is it kind of feels like a Greek tragedy for John Kramer, because he starts out with really good intentions. He wants to kind of revolutionize the way people rehabilitated because he saw that the system we have is failing. And through the movies, he kind of gets a little more arrogant in how far ahead he can plan things, how he's able to shift people's viewpoints. He trusts some of the wrong people, obviously, more so in 4, 5, and 6. And by the end, he loses the one loved one he has left, his wife, Jill Tuck, to his own arrogance. So does that kind of play as a Greek tragedy to you guys?
Oedipus Rex, Hamlet, stuff like that, where it's like the more you believe in something and fight for something, and the more you put yourself on the line, the more you have to lose.
Yeah, you're like undone by your own hand.
Yeah, and I feel like that's like you did it to yourself, you know what I mean? But at the same time, it's very tragic. Kind of just like it kind of reminds me a little bit of like Death Note, like how Light Yagami started out in that, and he had good intentions. He didn't like the system. He thought things were corrupt. He was really upset with it. Wanted to change it. Wanted to see change. Really wanted to like have see the good in people and have that help out. And just in the end, like got too corrupted, got too prideful, and in the end, it was his own demise.
Yeah. Starting off, we're going to go into movie by movie now. First movie, I don't know about you guys, but when this movie came out, it was a mind blower. It was one of my favorite things to come out that year in 2004, I believe. Early 2004, or was it Halloween 2004?
It was Halloween 2004.
Yeah, this movie changed the way I saw horror movies for a hot minute, and it kind of got more gratuitous as the movies went with the violence. The stories remained pretty good. The twists were always fun to kind of anticipate and try to work out as you went. But this first movie, for as minimalistic as it was effective. What were you guys' first experiences with Saw?
I actually started off with the third movie, ironically enough, because I think that year aired my freshman year. My senior year in high school. So I couldn't see the ones previous to that because I was too young. So I watched the third one first, and then I went back and watched the first and the second, and then rewatched them in order. So for me, I started off with the third one, and it was kind of like the middle things. I'm like, what happened before this? What's going on? So it kind of made me want to go back and watch them. So for me,
Robin,
it revolutionized things for sure.
I remember as they were coming out with them, and I just didn't touch them because it's just the torture porn thing. It's just so mine. But I mean, I didn't mind watching them for this. For one, older, and I always wanted to, but it was also like they were coming out, and I kind of did want to see them more concisely too. Like binge them. Sick. But I will say too, like it really did come and market like a whole new kind of horror movie that was acceptable, where you could have things like Hostel be more mainstream. There was not much stuff like that that was, most people kind of knew about, was like a thing. It was usually like B stuff from like the 70s on, if they had something like this.
Mhm. Lucas, what about you? When you first saw the first Saw movie, how did you react?
I was blown away by it. I mean, the psychological horror, which we typically associate with not as much gore or on-screen violence, except in this there is. You have the kind of focusing on the flaws of man, where the man behind all of it is flawed, and how all of these stories interconnect in this just anywhere, anytown USA. We don't really know the town or the city where this. There's not a. It's not like Camp Crystal Lake. It's not Haddonfield. It's not Springwood. We don't really know where this takes place, and I think that's where the series really succeeds, is because there is grounded in some reality. It creates its own mysticism that, these traps that we see in this movie, they don't rely on magic, don't rely on any supernatural things. Conceivably speaking, conceptually speaking, somebody could create these things. If they had the time, they had the resources, they had the energy, these things could happen. And I think that's part of what scares the shit out of people with these movies.
Mhm.
Is
I like
it's
how,
very much plausible.
Like you said, the killing ground of this movie isn't like a campsite or a street or anything like that. The killing ground is society. Like, as the Joker might say, we live in a society, ...
Yeah.
And that's the main setting in this, is society in general and all of its flaws. Because movie by movie, you can kind of see each one has a central thesis. Like part 6, for instance, was on the healthcare system. And I believe it was part 4 or 5 was on, the struggles of actually trying to be a good cop. And that's that guy's
Saw
downfall.
4 was that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, we'll get into movie by movie, but that's pretty sweet too. Like how the killing ground was just very generalized, but it somehow worked. Like it worked without any kind of specificity.
I wanted to talk about that really quick. When we were watching the Saw movies, my sister's 3 years younger than me, so I had her watch the first one, the second one, and I remember her being like, "I'm so scared." Like she was scared of being in a jigsaw trap. She's like, "I don't value my life enough," and I just remember being like, "No, you're fine. It's fine, because everyone in these movies is some way, shape, or form connected back to John Kramer." So she just thinking that that was a scenario that could happen. I feel like that hit home with a lot of people. Oh no, this could happen to me, a sort of scenario. But I mean, also I like the fact that it's well, no, it couldn't, because John Kramer really goes after people directly connected to him. So that was one way I had to talk her through it. I'm like, "No, you're fine. It's okay. I'm sorry. I scared you."
Traumatizing your siblings is part of having siblings.
Right? I'm sorry.
I had a couple of questions too. Ashley, I think you could probably answer these best. Well, to anyone in general, really. First one is, why a pig-faced mask? What does the pig-faced mask represent?
I have this for you. I have this answer. Are you ready?
I'm ready. You guys ready?
So,
you ready?
Yes, I'm so ready. Fun fact, John Kramer had a lot of ideologies that he was a part of, and people argue back and forth where they're like, the baptism and stuff like that. One of the songs in the musical score, it's kind of like one of Amanda's themes, is actually entitled Baptism, if you look into that. And I think that's really cool. So there's that. But the pig mask in the Chinese zodiac actually stands for rebirth. And if you notice, the year that everything starts going down, back when John Kramer, I think he gets Cecil, they're at that Year of the Pig festival, and he puts on the pig mask.
Yes.
And I think that's some symbolism there. It's a rebirth, it's a rebaptism. There's also things in society, cops, pigs. I know that's derogatory, but also we can't deny that a lot of the cops in these movies were corrupt, and stuff like that. So, but at the core, I think the pig mask is just stating rebirth and symbolism from the Chinese zodiac, because if you remember, he had planned his son's birth all about that. It was so important to him. He chose when his son was going to be born, the month, so we're talking astrology, we're talking the year of the Chinese zodiac, So all of that was so important to John Kramer as he was dying of cancer to have this. So when all that was taken away from him, it like changed his entire direction.
Yeah,
I have a couple questions too about Gordon specifically in the first Saw movie. Do you think that Jigsaw was kind of hoping that he would pass his part of the trap and become his disciple? That way he could execute more of his plans for future victims. Because I think by this point he already had a cop on his side, didn't he? And he had Amanda, but he didn't have like a surgical person.
Yes. So I do think that. I think with Dr. Gordon, like, because there's a line where he says in one of the movies, I was his patient and he was mine. So when people are like, I don't understand why Dr. Gordon comes back in the seventh movie, it doesn't make any sense. I'm like, no, it makes perfect sense. Like, who did you think was doing all these surgical aspects to the Saw movies? Like, who did you think that was? Because it wasn't Amanda. It wasn't Hoffman. Like, John Kramer, he had no knowledge in like surgical procedures. So you had to have someone that did. I think he did want to recruit him. I think he saw a lot of himself in Dr. Gordon, which is why he ended up being, in my personal point of view, the truest disciple. Because it was like, I think, like, you know, he saw potential in him. He knew that, like, when push came to shove, if you like threatened him with something he really cared about, his family, which was the same for John Kramer himself, that he was, you know, plan for the best, but like still maybe expect the worst. Like, I think he wanted to recruit Dr. Gordon.
What do you guys think? Also, one question I had too, I think Ashton, you and I might have already discussed this, but why is it that some of the victims get like quick 30 to 60 second traps where they're on a timer? Like, you really have to get over the shock of being there and like be able to listen to the clues he's giving you very attentively and at the risk of dying. But some people, like the main characters, for instance, have like an hour or two to go through all this stuff. Like, how does he decide who deserves brutality?
Yeah, I have a theory kind of on that. And maybe it's just because I'm like trying to get in the mind of, you know, like John Kramer. The people that have like a redemption play for or making mistakes, I feel like they're given like the biggest chance for a redemption arc. So their games are like longer, it has different parts to it, different like people involved, stuff like that. Whereas like the people that were like, I don't want to say worse, but for lack of a better word, like the one guy that was in the fourth movie where he had to gouge his own eyes out because he was like so abusive to all those women, he had done horrible things. That was more of like a crime and punishment.
Yeah.
Where society had like failed in that regard. So it was like, I feel like it's a crime and punishment versus like redemption arc, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Oh, I wanted to touch on this really quick because I just thought about it when you said this, Lucas. You said the phrase, John Kramer failed, he couldn't even kill himself. It kind of reminds me of It's a Wonderful Life, if anyone's familiar with that, where like his whole life is going horrible. And he's like, I wish I wasn't ever even born. And then he sees like what it would be like if he wasn't born. I think it's kind of like the same scenario where like John Kramer like tries to kill himself, fails at that, and then is like, maybe my life has a greater purpose. Like, maybe I can help people change their lives and see a greater purpose to life like I now see in my own life. So that was a really interesting and profound thought.
I think we can say too, the first movie, we had the worst acting of the series in the first movie.
Yeah.
You guys agree with that?
The worst acting, but some of the best one-liners from arguably the worst actor in this, Lee Winnell, as
he's
Adam.
A great screenwriter, but a bad actor.
So bad. Like when Adam would say lines, like a part of my brain would be like,
woke up in an actual shithole. The most fun I've ever had without lubricant. And
yeah, it's cool too. I mean, for as much as we can rag on the acting in this movie, I will point out one actor or actress, Shawnee Smith. She actually had 104-degree flu while filming this. So all that tear in her face and the sweat and like the look of I don't want to be here. That look of I don't want to be here was very, very real. Like, she's a great actress.
And the look of dying.
I also want to point out too, Kiri Ilwis, how do you pronounce his last name? I'm not going to do it right.
Elwes.
Yeah. His
Elvis. Yeah.
his introduction at his desk, well, the secondary introduction after you actually see him in the room, he has the clock on his desk that you see in Jigsaw's office later. And I don't know if it's on purpose or not, but there is a lot of foreshadowing that eventually he's going to be more involved as one of Jigsaw's disciples, just in that first movie alone, which I think is proof that they didn't just kind of play it as they went with their directors and storyline. I think they had a plan from the first movie onward, just in case they got the green light from sequels.
I think the clock symbolizes time, like everyone's time in life, like the choices you make, your time may come to an end. But like later in one of the movies, you see John Kramer destroy that clock in front of Jill Tuck, which was a big deal because he was like the whole agreement, like it was around this clock when he was talking about like doing that with his partner. So later him smashing that clock was a big deal. But I do think it's interesting that it's a very similar clock to the one that Dr. Gordon had on his desk. Another like tie and symbolism between those two characters, I'd say.
And does anybody have any closing thoughts on the first movie? Any specifics you want to go over?
The point that you, Ashton, and you, Chase, just made had me thinking, and I had this in my notes. Given that they had a plan of kind of where they want to go, it makes me wonder if Saw may have worked better, worse, whatever, as a television series as opposed to a film series.
I think it's going to happen eventually. It's bound to happen. They're going to reboot this property, not as a film, but as a series on MTV at some point. Or VH1 possibly. I don't know. It's going to be a CBS for all I know.
Yeah.
No!
They're going to water this down so much and make a TV series of it.
Scream
Well,
wasn't so
maybe
bad.
not. Maybe not, because Lionsgate has a first look deal with Stars right now. Like by the
something
end of
like
the year,
HBO would probably allow it.
Right, but I'm saying, but Lionsgate that has the Saw franchise under their umbrella has the deal with Stars. So
Okay.
like by the end of this year, Spiral, when it hits streaming, and that will be on Stars. So it makes you wonder, especially when they're trying to expand their roster of television shows, if maybe even in a year, a Saw in the Spiral kind of timeline, which I realize isn't the same as the Saw, but work with me. But that concept and this got me thinking.
Well, while we're going to that area, I think the whole 1 a year worked while the franchise was good. Then we got part 8 that nobody asked for a couple years later when people had already forgotten about the movies. And I think the resurgence now is that people have forgotten about it enough that it looks fresh all over again. Like it's going to get like a whole new audience with this movie. And I think that can open up a lot of new directions they could go, even if the movie itself doesn't really work.
A lot of the younger audience, when Saw, we'll call it Saw 8, premiered, were like, what is this? Like, what's happening? They didn't see the previous movies. So for them, it was new, but they weren't like a huge fan. I think that was interesting. And one of my friends said something. He was like, Tobin Bell is to Jigsaw as like Robert Englund was or is to Freddy Krueger, you know what I mean? So I think it'll be interesting in these new movies to see the take on like even Spiral, or if there is a TV series, if Tobin Bell is recast or if he's a part of it. Because I know myself, like Tobin Bell is Jigsaw to me. So
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd be too much of a fan of that role being recast to someone else. I'd be like, my brain.
I would be so terrified to piss him off at a convention, even inadvertently, because in his head, he's making a plan like a death trap. Like, you have wronged me. Solve this puzzle or I will stab you.
Or if he's not, he'll look like it.
He will look like it. Apparently, like, this is just like what I heard through the grapevine. Like, Tobin Bell was like a huge part of framing John Kramer's like psychology and personality through the series. Like, he wanted to be more involved in the movies from the second one on. So a lot of what we have of John Kramer is like influenced from Tobin Bell, and I think that's pretty cool. So you're not wrong. Like, don't fuck over Tobin Bell at a convention.
He thought of all this sick
Saw
shit.
Game.
Yeah.
Bear trap on your head. Like, oops.
The bear trap shows up several times in this whole series, even in like a different aspect in part 8 with the laser, weird, stupid trap. It's kind of like a knockoff of the bear trap.
Yeah, it is. There's the Venus flytrap one too. The one that, or the.
Oh, yeah.
That's the one I think of a lot.
Ooh,
Can't do it.
which game do you just like? I'll have random moments of a certain like game that will just like pop into my head. Like I'll be at work doing something, I'll be like, oh, remember that game in the Saw movies? Do you guys have any specific game that's like that for you?
That actually fits moving on, actually, because my favorite one is the needle trap in part 2.
Ah,
Ah,
sometimes
that made
I
me
will just
so
randomly
mad.
think about the second movie as well. And mine is actually the one with the glass box with the syringe, but like the
Ugh.
razor blades. Like I think about that all the time.
Oh,
You mean like the
It's just like-
McDonald's straw trap?
Yeah, I think about like that.
What would I know people have already gone through in other YouTube videos and kind of went through like how they could have gotten through these traps individually. How the hell would you get that one? Would you just reach it with one hand and knock it
So-
out or something? What?
So your hand's caught in this one. You're like, whoopsie daisies. I wasn't paying attention. And then you're like, oh, wait, no, both my hands are trapped. But like, go with me on this. Instead of putting your hand in the second trap, what if
Right.
you move the razor blades like out of your skin in that one? Because then you could grab the syringe, pull it out. Like, sure, you'd still be cut, but then you might be able to like wrap up your arm because this arm wouldn't have been caught in a trap. Then you wouldn't be like, oh no, I'm caught in a trap.
That
You could
makes
have
sense.
just
Yeah,
But-
that
Because
was
then like
funny.
you're kind of thinking with logic rather than like, oh, there's 2 holes. It must be 2 arms. I have
yeah,
to do
2 arms. Oh, wait a minute, they're both blades. Like I think about that one all the time. But also, Zach Morris.
I think it's Zach Morris because I remember
Zach
he wasn't
Morris
saved by
from
the Bell
DC's
Kid.
World. He brought up a really good point about like who that game was actually supposed to be for. It was intended for the guy that has like 0 patience. The guy in the beginning of the second movie
buff
that
guy?
like, is like, let's open the door and gets like shot in the head because he had 0 patience.
Oh,
And you pointed
yeah.
out that on that trap, the top of it was unlocked the whole time. So he didn't even have to put his arms through the blades. He could have lifted the top up because it wasn't locked and taken the syringe out. But patience, if he had taken time to like look around and see his surroundings and really think about the trap, he wouldn't have been caught in that because that trap wasn't meant for the girl that like got stuck in it. It was meant for him, for patience.
And I know like
I
this.
thought that was really amazing.
I know part 2 is actually based on a script by the director Darren Lynn Bousman called The Desperate, and a lot of the traps were added in order to make it a Saw movie. But I think they also really fit into that theme of all these people are desperate. They are rushing around. They're all there for themselves. They're not thinking a lot of things through. Like they're at the bottom of, they're hitting rock bottom mostly. Like specifically that trap where you're so desperate, you're not going to look at the possibility of how can I get through this safely. It's I'm going to do whatever it takes to get that, the golden ticket, the syringe, whatever I need right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, that also made me so mad when he just pushes her in there. I was like, oh my God. I would want to kill him.
Oh, that
I'd get a
that
few
trap
syringes
is
and
still
probably
one I
stab him
cannot
in the
look at.
I like too how part 2 kind of starts off with the snitches get stitches trap. And once again, like this guy had like a really short time to not only like be like, okay, I'm in a place I've never seen before, but also listen very attentively to the clues and like react. So I think if you're given less than a minute to react to anything, it's that life important. Like you're not going to make the best choices, even if you understand what's going on.
Potentially,
Those are
When
probably
I
the
think-
people he wants to die more and the people he'd rather recruit. Like that's why that first movie was pretty much just Gordon the whole movie, in my opinion.
true. And I think the second movie has a lot to do with like, would you guys work together or are you guys gonna like kill each other off? Like, here's an idea. What if they all would have just taken down Xavier? Like they would have been like, you know what? You're kind of crazy. Let's just all work together and take you down, and the rest of us will work as a team to get all these antidotes. Like, plot twist. That it wouldn't have ended up the way it did, but
Some of you might
survival-
know. Some of you might know part 2 is the one with the Wahlberg brother in it. Like this
It
one
was
in part
3
4.
too.
Was he-
Fuck.
He was in 2 and
Eric
3
Matthews.
because his son was in the next one.
Oh yeah. Well, I thought he was in
Oh,
2 and
actually,
4.
He lasted and he dies at a different movie, not the first one
Yeah,
he's in.
He dies in 4 where the 2 ice things come and smash his head in. But we'll get
It
to
was
that.
3 or 4. Yeah,
It was a very Wahlberg death.
he was in more than the
he
one
got,
movie.
he got Wahlberg.
Do you guys want to know a fun fact?
Yes.
Eric Matthews, besides Amanda, is my most hated character in the Saw movies. Most
Really?
hated character. And then
Well, he
after
helped
Eric
create
Matthews,
Amanda.
it is. I mean, I count Amanda. Amanda would be number 1. Number 2 would be Eric Matthews. Number 3 would be Jeff.
Fucking
Here's
Jeff.
why. Because
Slow-ass
Eric
motherfucking Jeff.
Matthews, fuck Jeff. But Eric Matthews was the reason that all of them were like he planted like evidence on people to get convictions. Like because of that, I don't know if you guys caught this.
He planted Amanda though. that
He did,
helped
and
create
she
her.
didn't have a drug addiction until she went to jail, and then she became addicted to drugs because he planted that evidence on her. So Amanda's whole drug addiction, which actually leads to the death of John Kramer's son Gideon. All that can be actually traced back to Eric Matthews. So technically, he caused that by framing her for something that she didn't do, sending her to jail, and then she got addicted to the drugs that she wasn't then at that time addicted to, which led to her like having Cecil rob where Jill Tuck worked, and we know how that ended. So
That's really interesting. I
fuck
never thought
Eric
of that.
Matthews hard. Fuck him. Also, fuck Jeff.
Fucking Jeff.
At
It's
the
like,
very
it's
least,
like the Eric Matthews butterfly effect, because if he hadn't
Yeah,
done
like,
that
you
one
fucked
thing,
up,
it set
bro.
everything else in motion. Like
Yeah.
it's all in his hands, kind of.
Yeah,
at
so
least
fuck him.
at least that Wahlburger becomes a smash burger 2 films later.
I think we need to like stop and appreciate too how good of an actor Shawnee Smith is, because not only is she playing this role to the hilt, like she's doing such a good job, she's also playing a role within a role as the escape room person in part 2.
Mhm.
Like for all intents and purposes, part 2 is an escape room movie.
Yes.
Because she's like the person who works there, trying to guide you through the game, give you the clues without telling you what to do, and occasionally dropping a hint.
She does occasionally drop a hint, and I do love that because, like, just the way my brain works, I'd be like, "Wait a minute," because she's like, "Yeah, I've been in his games before." I'm like, "I don't know. You seem to know a lot of information. Like, you know exactly to look behind, like, where to find the tape recorder behind the bricks. You knew exactly where to look for that.
Right.
Weird flex, but okay."
Oh, was
Way
she
to
like a
find
theater
that.
major before being a drug addict? Because
Like,
she's a
right,
good
like,
actress as an actress.
Clues.
Oh
my
god. People say that Home Alone's Kevin McAllister was Jigsaw as a kid, but I think Jigsaw was also Steve from Blue's Clues.
Yeah, he's like, "Here's your first clue."
I mean, Steve did go bald.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
why they kicked off. That's why
Also,
they
one
brought on
comment I gotta make
Fuck.
from this movie is like he says in the movie that Jigsaw was originally meant as a symbol. I kind of feel like that got lost the further into the series you get, where it's not so much a symbol, it's more about control on his part, where he's trying to not just push people toward making change on their own behalf, he's trying to kind of control every outcome, every possible direction these traps can go.
I
Pride.
think that was partially because he was dying as well, and he was trying to make sure everything was set before he leaves, which, it does get resolved by the end.
That's really smart. Yeah. Kind of like, I have all these thoughts and I want it to play out a certain way, but I'm going to anticipate other ways that it might play out before I pass. Like, I want it to go this way, but it may go this way.
It's all about
And that goes
Antissa.
back to the time, the whole time
Patient.
thing. Like, I only have
Yes.
so much time.
I also want to point out too, part 2 is kind of like the Breakfast Club of the series. We get all these people stuck in one room together, and they're all kind of figuring out, can we all get
Angry
along?
jock.
We got the angry jock who,
The
yeah,
fact
you
that we're
do.
talking about Blue's Clues and fucking The Breakfast Club
It is.
in this segment in particular, I don't disagree with you, but I never thought of it that way, and I'm kind of pissed that I didn't think about it before.
Directed to Saw.
It's like, you guys, Principal Jigsaw says we all have to learn to get along. Otherwise, we get another day detention.
Yeah, like,
Don't
fuck
you,
you.
forget about me.
Just holding up a saw in that fist.
Oh fuck. I was also interested to learn, and I didn't put this together until my most recent rewatch for this episode, that the sarin gas that they use in the house, when he references the Tokyo subway attacks, and I didn't realize until very recently that was the cult Olmrikyo that did those in 1995. The problem is that not all of the canisters that they had of the gas went off. So, like, yes, 13 people died and thousands others were hurt or injured, but like compared to what they wanted to do, I mean, it's funny to call an attack like that a failure, but considering the scale they were going for, it was.
Here's a question for everybody in general. What character in the house in part 2 do you have the most in common with?
Ooh, I know. I
Ooh.
don't even know what her name was. The girl that was from Seven Heaven, that chick, where she's like, wait, maybe she's like, oh look, X marks the spot and all that stuff. But it also
One that
makes
got
me
the
realize,
keys.
yeah, she's like, but it also makes me realize maybe I wouldn't live through a Saw movie. She just gets taken out by the gas. So I'm like, well,
Oh, right
darn
away.
it, there were my chance. Darn it, like didn't even fail a trap. Shoot.
I would say like the guy with the very little patience in part 2, the guy who kind of this leaps before he looks or takes anything in. He's like shiny object. I want it go.
He's like,
And then
let's do this.
He's like the squirrel. He sees metal. He's like,
And then he gets his head fucking blown off. With
that's how I would go. It wouldn't even be a cool trap. Like there'd be no design to my trap.
For
It's
the
like,
longest
he fucking
time,
ran
though-
into a spike in the wall. That wasn't even there for him.
For the
He just
longest
keep
time,
fell
though,
down
that
the
was one of my
stairs.
favorite things was that trap because it was so sudden. Everything else in the films is so like drawn out when that is just one and done. He turns the key, bang, dead.
But after
Well,
that one
no-
bullet got fired, could they still open the door or try it again somehow? Because I'm pretty sure they put one bullet in that gun.
Well, that's
Yeah,
why
but they're
Hoffman was
scared to
like,
try.
when he was setting up, when John Kramer was setting that up with, I believe, Hoffman, he's like, seems like a lot of like stuff to anticipate for like, you know, a game. And he's like, what, I forget what John Kramer says exactly, but it's basically like, you know, always hope for the best, anticipate the worst, like always think about every option. So he knew the dude with patience. He wanted him to make it to that game, but he's like, is he gonna open the door even though I told him not to? I bet he is. I
Was
bet
John
he
Kramer
might.
a Boy Scout?
Was he what?
Huh?
Was John Kramer a Boy Scout?
Was he a Boy Scout?
Be prepared.
He would have gotten his merit badge in punishing people, but not so much in like actually rehabilitating a lot of people.
Punishing people. Wow, what a dom. BDSM, baby.
He would
John-
know.
I want to see that knockoff. Jigsaw.
You want to talk
Triple X
torture
parody.
porn? I hate myself. for that
Jigsaw.
one.
He'll split you in half.
Literally.
One of the worst things for me to see in the whole series was the guy that pretty much had his half of his arm like sliced in half because
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Part
that's one of the
uh,
worst things for me to watch.
I think that was 5 or 6.
Was it? Because he needed
Like paper cut of the
Buzz?
century.
because that was another one where they had to work together.
Oh yeah. That
what's
that's
gonna
why-
work? Team
We'll get there. We'll get there.
What's gonna work?
No.
Some Wonder Pets.
Like my closing thought on part 2 is I love John's little smile at the end where he's in the car all bloodied up and he's just grinning like, yeah, this is just
this
starting.
is as smug as you see him like
I don't
the
know.
entire series. I think like this is where I think he's the most arrogant but still in control. And from the next film on, and of course we see it in flashbacks, so this is where he's at the peak arrogant. It's like kind of the line graph of his most arrogant but also most successful is like right here, and before long it's just gonna tank.
Yeah.
I want to talk about something before we go because I love it.
Sure.
We didn't touch on it. Detective Carey in the second Saw movie, who was Eric Matthews' partner that he cheated on his wife with. Okay, she was like the entire movie. She was like, "No, you gotta play by the games. You gotta listen to what John Kramer say. You gotta do it his way." And he's like, "I just want you to talk to me. I just want you to treat me like a real person and not a criminal." Which, if you think about it, that was Eric Matthews' whole issue. He was like, you know, guilty until proven innocent, and even then, you're still guilty because I framed you. So just always guilty. So John Kramer was like, "Treat me like a person if you want to see your son again." Like, yeah. I'm a criminal, yeah, but treat me like a person. And Eric Matthews didn't end up doing that. So that's a fun fact. But I like that Detective Carey, like the entire time, she's like, just play by the rules. So my favorite, like, little glimmer in the whole second Saw movie is when Eric Matthews is like, "I just want my son, like, where is he?" And John Kramer goes, "He's in a safe place." And he looks down, and if you don't realize it, the safe is like under where John Kramer had been sitting and talking to Eric Matthews the entire time. So his son was literally like in there with like a breathing mask on, like probably like what, a foot away from him the entire time.
Right.
So if he had just waited and talked to him and treated him like a person, he would have just been able to have his son again. But no, he like beats up John Kramer and forces him to take him to the house where everything was.
Ooh.
And they didn't realize that everything had been pre-recorded. So it's kind of like you
straight up
failed,
snaps
though.
his finger in half too.
Yeah.
Like, you hear John scream in
Yeah.
this one. You don't really see that in any other movie except like he's screaming in anger in a couple movies.
Yeah. Like, so once
Mhm.
again, fuck Eric Matthews.
Fuck Eric Matthews.
Yeah, Jigsaw definitely said ACAB in this one.
Also, do you think he was intending on sparing Matthew's son the entire time? Because he was saying stuff
Yeah.
like, I hope your son pisses blood or something. But I think because he let him out after he still fails the trap, the son still gets out of the safe.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean by like an innocent. Like, I feel like that's why it's so out of character in the later movie when John Kramer goes after someone that I feel like was an innocent or like a pawn in the game, and we'll talk about that later. But with Eric Matthews' son, I think his name was Daniel, by the way. With Daniel, I feel like the whole reason that Amanda was even in that game, besides the Blue's Clues aspects, was to literally be there to protect Daniel throughout the movie. Because had they found out that he was Eric Matthews' son after Eric Matthews had put all of them in jail for shit, I mean, Xavier alone would be like, I'm gonna kill that kid because fuck that cop. You know what I mean? So I think Amanda was there to kind of like help protect him and to further the game.
It was cool too. How even when she got pushed into the needle trap, which she wasn't anticipating, she still stayed in character. That's why I think her character before all the drug stuff and before meeting Eric Matthews must have been a theater major because damn it, she commits.
She's like, we going hard.
Her
Never
life
say
is
no,
changed.
just go with it.
Yeah, but
About Lucas and Lucas and you, Luddite, you, Robin. Sorry.
you would almost have to wonder if she started questioning it, like, is being dumped in a pile of syringes worth it?
I don't know.
I
She was
gotta
like,
put my job back on Monster. Need a new one.
she was like, I love
Big
John
sucks.
Kramer. He's
For
my
me.
daddy and my dad role model. I love him. He's both. So she was like, that's like some Stockholm
better,
syndrome
I
stuff
know.
right there. He changed my life.
Moving on to Saw 3, the one that features the arguably worst character of the series, fucking Jeff, who is told from the beginning of his trap, you have a limited time and all these people are going to die unless you save them. Like, you have some decisions to make here. And every single trap, as he's walking, just taking his time,
Oh,
he pauses and like really chews the scenery for a second.
Yeah.
Like, it needed some theme music, honestly, like some very...
I
What did you
hate
guys think of
Jeff.
Saw 3 in general? What are your thoughts on it? Yeah,
I
that's about
hate
it.
Saw 3. I
I
hate Saw 3. I hate it.
Saw 3 is the one you actually
Okay.
had a question about. What was Amanda's key for around her neck?
Yes. So you'll see in Saw 3 that Amanda has the key around her neck. Now, I have seen multiple theories on what people think that key is for. Here are the 3 of them that I remember, and here's what I think the option is. Or maybe it's 2. One of them is, nope, it's 3. All right. So the 3 are as follows. One was to unlock the like head trap thing around, who is it? It's Lynn. So that's
Yeah, the
one
chocolate
possible.
collar.
I don't think it's that one. The second possible is, do you remember when we see that Amanda's even fallen farther from grace from the drug addiction, and now she's like cutting and stuff like that again because of the trauma? She has like this like little lock box. Do we think that the key is to the lock box? That could be a scenario where she like cuts herself because she cuts her thighs to hide it from John Kramer that she's like cutting.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's John Kramer, like he doesn't know. And the third option that I think is most likely that it is so Jeff and Lynn's daughter, she's locked in a room, right? And remember, has John Kramer's dying and he's like, no one knows where your daughter is but me, blah, 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 blah. I think Amanda had the keys to that room, and the whole game was like actually like it was for Jeff, yes, but it was like mostly for Amanda. And like I think she had the keys for the little girl. And I think later when Hoffman like takes credit for like saving the little girl from the locked room, you're like, well, wait, like, yeah, he was involved, but where did he get those keys? So I think he took the keys from Amanda because he wanted her to always fail. So I think
Wasn't there a post-credits scene where Amanda is seen interacting with the daughter?
Yeah, she says, don't trust Hoffman. That's what she says.
Yeah.
I didn't see that. Wow.
She's like, don't trust him, like, or something like that. And I mean, Amanda and Hoffman,
Which, fair enough.
You want to talk about rivals? Those two, they hated each other.
Now, the person I feel like was kind of unfairly victimized in this most was the surgeon. Like, he's punishing her for being pretty much a hardworking do-gooder who had no actual flaws, I don't think. Like, she's just the standard person at the hospital who's busting her ass, like 16-hour work days. Fucking, do you guys know any surgeons? Like, they bust their asses. He could at least given her a coffee the whole time she was trapped in there.
Are you talking about Lynn?
Yeah.
No, parallel, because remember Dr. Gordon was the cheating husband who didn't appreciate what he had. Well, Lynn was the cheating wife who didn't appreciate what she had.
What is up with him and cheaters? Did his wife cheat on him at some point in this? And he's just like, oh, I'm going to punish all of them.
No, family was so important to him. Like, family was everything to him. And he lost Gideon.
But isn't it like a death-worthy thing? Like, it's horrible. Like, it sucks. But like, is it like, I'm going to put you in a bear trap and make you die by your own hand?
She wasn't valuing her life because they had lost their son. So she was like, super depressed and not like living her life to the fullest, and just like threw herself into work to avoid the issues that she had with her husband at home. And the real issue with her, as well as Jeff, was they were taking for granted their daughter, who is still alive, and they weren't appreciating her. So the whole game was to make them realize what they had. Be like, yes, they lost their son and it was tragic. It was heart-wrenching. It was so sad. But they still had a daughter alive that they were both horrible to and neglecting, and were shitty parents too.
You don't think that makes him kind of a hypocrite, though? Because he also lost somebody, his own son. And rather than embrace what he had left, his wife, he alienates her. He yells at her a couple times. He eventually leads to her death by his own design. And isn't he kind of a hypocrite in that aspect? Because he's telling these people to like, appreciate what you have left.
He's a hypocrite besides that.
Yeah.
I mean, well, yes, I do see the hypocrisy of that, but also like there's a scene in the hospital that I think always resonates with me, with John Kramer and Jill Tuck / Kramer at the time period. Right after she loses Gideon, she makes this like comment to him. She's like, I just wanted to save them or help them. I can't remember what word she uses. And it's like something happens in his head. It's like a trigger, which like changes everything. He's like, you can't help them or you can't save them. They have to help themselves, which is where where it all begins, like through the anger and all that. Like, they have to help themselves. Like, and if you think about like every single Saw game, it's like, you got to do it yourself. You got to help yourself.
Well,
there
also
are the team wins, but
there's also the freezer trap too, which wasn't really about the woman trapped in there helping herself. It was relying on a slow dimwit who can't do shit right to help her. Like, she was DOA from the beginning of that trap. She was gonna die.
Oh yeah.
I mean, she didn't have to.
What could she have done though? She was chained up in a room with.
No, I mean, she was fucked. But fuck Jeff. Like, every single trap, it's like, dude, like, you had the power to save all these people and you didn't, because you're a piece of shit.
Like, he single-handedly pads the runtime by like 30 minutes.
Like, I just like every time I watch Jeff do something, it's like he waits until the last possible minute as they're about ready to die. And he's like, oh God, maybe I should have done something. Oh, and it's like, well, you waited too long at this point. Like, what were you doing? You didn't think about that when you first saw them, like about on their deathbed.
He's such an idiot. Even the part where he tries to help her to get that key behind the freezing parts, he pushes his cheek up against it. I'm like, dude, you have a coat on. Put it where your face would be touching.
Intelligent.
These things through.
Well, if he hadn't just sat there and been like, why did you let my son die? Even though she had nothing to do with it, he could have saved her.
Yeah, she's like, I made a mistake. Fuck me, right?
Everybody makes mistakes. Everybody has those days.
Oh my God, it was a crossover of the century. Miley Cyrus and Jigsaw.
You're welcome. Content.
Now, would
Fair
you guys
enough.
have actually gotten in that pool of guts to help the judge in the third act? Because that's a big no for me.
Okay,
I'd be like,
Disease.
Yes. I would have, only because I'm a huge believer in redemption arcs as well as like forgiveness. And I've never lost a child. I don't know what that's like. So I can't relate to that. But I mean, I have lost my father, and there were some things that I feel like could have been done differently. So sort of with like healthcare, like the hospital, like routine checks and stuff like that. And I mean, my dad was the most important person to me, and I'm not like, well, fuck them, we should sue them, or like, I hope they die or anything like that. You know what I mean? Like, and I know it's a different scenario because I haven't been put in that exact Saul situation myself. But as someone that just is like, understands like humanity as a whole, I'm like, there should be potentially a chance for forgiveness, or at least judgment, like a different form of judgment.
Lucas, you were about to say something before, and I totally interrupted you. What did you have to say?
I don't remember. Probably something about fuck Jeff. Fuck Jeff. I didn't like Jeff at all.
So, right. Well, I have two things with that. One is Jeff embodies grief because of his situation. I think it's very much. I'm choosing my words carefully with this, but I think, and again, trying to get in Jigsaw's mind is another ball game. But how I have it in my notes is, could slow ass motherfucking Jeff, credit to James A. Janissa Dead Meat for that name for him, be an allegory for grief bringing everyone down. He's not, to in the films, made an attempt to work through the death of his son, and it's bringing everyone down. His marriage dead. When we see it play out in his game, no one lives. No one makes it. Everyone is operating on his time, and his time is half time everyone else's. And you almost, dare I say, lose sympathy for him after a while, because you're like, kind of like what Ashton was, awful that he's lost this, outstanding circumstance, but to be a point where you start to work through that. And I'm not saying like it sucks, get over it. Like, I lost my father when I was young too, but there's such a thing as being able to work through it, and it's past that lack of attacking the issue head on manifests itself in these disgusting ways with the judge. And that's another thing I want to talk about, kind of on the flaws of the justice system. From this film is when the judge tells Jeff, like, there are ways to have his sentence extended, and then it occurs like the driver that killed his son was black. That feels just really out of pocket, even for Saw.
I don't think that was intentional. I mean, if you're gonna look at casting as an equal opportunity, you can't say we can't.
Even if it wasn't intentional, even if it was through 2021 eyes with everything going on now, not saying that these things weren't issues when this movie came out, but just seeing that really hit me. Couldn't let go of it.
Yeah,
like whether it was I'm not accusing of it intentional, but I think it's something that was like, especially with what's going on right now, that hits really differently.
Yeah.
With the way things are going on right now, it does hit a little bit differently, but I like to think about it as well as just like life in general. Like, accidents happen. Like, I don't think they cast specifically with that intent, but I do see how looking at it with eyes that we have right now in 2021, how it does seem kind of like,
Hindsight's 2021.
Yeah, hindsight is 2020, but at the same time, I'm like, I
Yeah.
genuinely don't think that they were like, hey, let's do this. I think it was just
Yeah.
Oh no, and I'm not saying that was the case either, unless they're trying to like kind of tie in racial inequality in the justice system. Like, they had those, I don't think they had those. I think they still had those kid gloves on in this movie. Like, we get into like the bigger topics, I think, with Saw 6, which we'll get to. By no means am I saying that it was intentional on Darren Embellishment or the writer's parts, but it's something that stuck out and it needs to be talked about.
it does need to be talked about. But then in that regards, you have to think about his case being like so, or wait, his case was so minimal that it almost feels like, at that point that he almost got like a free pass then originally, besides when he's in the later test and all that relies on actually about the trap that he was in, like they compare that to the cross, like a Jesus scenario, because his eyes and like his legs were separated.
Okay.
His arms were like separated. It was like a cross scenario where it's like he was like, being punished for something that like that was an accident. You know what I mean? So all the hatred and all that Jeff had for him, it was an accident. So they like I think it was Zach Morris again was comparing that to the cross, because a lot of the games are compared to other torture devices and stuff throughout time.
Oh, yeah.
So I think that's why they had that symbolism there to be like, are you going to be like, are you going to kind of like Jesus? Are you going to persecute? Are you going to persecute someone? Like, so and then I've heard other people compare a lot of this all things like the forgiveness and stuff like that to different religions, as well as like the forgiveness in Christianity and stuff like that. Not to get on a religious standpoint.
Yeah.
I'm just talking about the symbolism.
Yeah,
of, like,
but I also
giving
think
a
that's
cross.
worth exploring, kind of the religious undertones and overtones of this franchise. I mean, you could definitely take the argument of Jigsaw as playing God in a sense. You could, at best, you could consider his beliefs non-denominational.
Yeah,
But
because
I
he has
think
a lot
there are
of
some-
things. Yeah, with like Buddhism and like even like
Right.
zodiacs and stuff like that. But I thought I thought it was really cool where they compared it to the cross, because I mean, just like from a biblical standpoint, how the Pharisees and the Jews, or it was the Romans, the Pharisees and the Romans condemned Jesus. Jeff was in turn condemning the unintentional
Timothy.
murderer of his son.
Well, I don't know. He wasn't really condemning, because he even says like this guy had a really bright future. He was doing everything right in life, but then he made a mistake.
I meant Jeff was condemning him. Not
Okay, yeah. Because Jigsaw kind of sets him up as like a wrongfully punished guy. Like
Yeah,
he said, like he
exactly. So,
served his
like-
time for a mistake he made.
yeah. So like Jesus, can you forgive him?
Yeah, he was otherwise a good guy.
Yeah.
But
So
he does
I
get like
think-
the worst punishment in a movie too. This is what's one that was hard for me to watch. I turn away every time.
I feel like the whole point of that movie was like each case should, like, if you think about Jigsaw with being like, you should like each person, like, oh my gosh, the crime of each person increased throughout Jeff's games, okay, throughout the entire game. So if he were to save the original girl in the beginning, he should be like, that should help him to want to save the next person who had a little bit more cause into the death and trial of his son. And then the next person, you should want to save them a little bit more. Like, you know what I mean? Like with each person he could have potentially saved, like, yes, like he would be getting closer to the person that he considers responsible. But also, like, if he had chosen to save these people, his heart of like forgiveness should also be increasing. Like the Grinch's heart grew 3 sizes that day.
Jeff's
Like-
speed went down 3 sizes that day.
Yeah, it's like
No
Jeff's
shit,
heart
yeah.
went down like 3 sizes that day. Fuck Jeff. God.
And that's
But-
that's a whole other thing too, of kind of Jeff's story. This movie, I think, has the best that escalation that we've come to expect, where like, yeah, freezing to death is an awful way to die, but visually speaking, there's only so much to it. You have the judge who's getting, drowned pig guts and all that. Gruesome, disgusting as hell. The behind the scenes for that is a fun watch, by the way.
Oh,
if
yeah.
anybody's checked that out. And then the rack is like consistently like one of the top 10 or top 5 traps on any like list that you see, any like BuzzFeed shit that you see, any BuzzFeed-esque listicles you see, and with good reason. It's memorable as fuck. But like,
it's funny too. The guy in the
yeah.
the guy in the pig trap didn't know. The actor did not know they're actually going to cover him in pig guts. They did not tell him that. Then they started doing it, and he's screaming for real. That's what they recorded. And they're like, "Well, you're already down there, so you might as well let us do it."
Might as well. I heard like they were like comparing it to like what you hear in like a video game, like everything the judge was saying. Like he just doesn't stop. Like, save me! I'm down here. I can hear you. Help me! Save me! Help! What are you doing? Why won't you help me? It kind of just seemed like.
Which is funny too, because have any of y'all played the Saw video games?
No.
Well, don't. They waste. They were not good. But I have to think about that, especially the guy that's on they reprise the pendulum trap in the first game.
Wait,
there
Saw
there are
games
long plays
with
and
an
Let's-
S?
They
made
had
more than
2
one?
video games.
Why? Who is this for?
I don't know, but the
I'm
first
about
one
ready
came
to
out,
play
I
them,
think.
even though they're going to be awful. Let's give them a go. That could be
I would
another
say,
episode.
if you don't want to play them, there are long plays. Big Survival Horror Network has long plays, at least the first game. But like, it was an interesting concept, but not worth the time unless you really need something to laugh at. I'm gonna be real.